Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump Recruitment discussion. This week we're talking is your team fit to perform next year, or are your team fatigued? Last week we looked at the different approaches of setting realistic goals and realistic targets for the business. However, if your employees aren't fit enough to perform, how are you actually going to reach your targets and beyond? So as always, we like to sort of come out with a couple of stats before we start to think. And we think about, are your are your team fit to perform? According to the Career Builders survey in the States, that states that 61% of employees are burnt out on the job. And according to the American Psychology Association, 89% of workers at companies that supported well-being initiatives are more likely to recommend their company as a good place to work. Research by Willis Towers Watson states that 70% of employers have improved their physical environment to encourage healthier behaviors. A finding from AFLAC state that 61% of employees agree that they have made a healthy lifestyle choices because of their company's well-being program. And Glassdoor gave us a survey that reminded us that 87% of employees expect their employer to support them in balancing work and personal commitments. 48% of employees, though, believe that investing in professional development is one of the most effective stress reduction methods that an organization can do. 70% of employees enrolled in well-being programs have reported higher job satisfaction than those not enrolled in company employment programs. 56% of employees had fewer sick days because of wellness programs, and 63% of employers offering wellness programs reported increased financial stability and sustainability and growth. For every dollar, this came out of an American survey, for every dollar spent on well-being program, a company saves $5.82 in lower employee absenteeism costs. And when it comes to business and employees' health, stress levels are reported to be the number one concern for almost half of all business owners. And persistent fatigue, 29%, insomnia, 26%, aches and pains, 24%, excessive anxiety, 23%, and weight gain, 18%, are the top 5 stress symptoms that cause lost work days. And that came out of Career Builders. So we've got lots of sort of data saying that your fitness of your employees will massively help drive your business forward. We've got lots of data therefore saying that, we're not really investing that much in health and well-being programs for employees to actually maintain their physical health and fitness. So today I'm joined by Heather and Dave. Paul is up in Scotland. So I think it's going to be a really interesting sort of talk and conversation. And I think what we should be thinking about is when we talk about the questions and talk about the answers, we want you to really interject on this one, because obviously this evolves around every single business. And this is part of every single business's obligation to their employees to help drive the business forward. And if it can help your business become more financially sustainable and grow, then it should be on every business owner's agenda. So let's kick off. How do you spot burnout in your sales teams?
Great question, Howard. Nice and open for you at the beginning. I think there's a couple of obvious ones. So one is drop off in performance. So an unexplained drop off in somebody's individual performance it can be a signal. Increased levels of absenteeism, so that not necessarily the long-term sick stuff, but the ad hoc days, and they're the kind of obvious ones. And then changes in people, people starting to argue or be sensitive or be quiet, or people who seem to be overreacting to situations. It's those personality changes, emotion being very close to the surface, I think are indicators sometimes of a burnout issue.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it, Heather? If you know your people, whether you're running a team of 5 or a team of 55, if you really know your people, you will know and notice a change in their behavior. And that can come from issues such as burnout. They could be a little bit more lethargic. You could probably see it in their eyes. I've seen it before with people. You just look at them and you just know something is different about them. You may not know what it is, and you may not know what the cause is, but you just know that something is different. Where if you have that relationship, you can begin to talk to them about, well, just what is going on. Sometimes it can be that the buzz has gone from that people, or from that desk, or from how they react with other people. Sometimes it presents itself in they suddenly start getting in a bit later, because maybe they don't care quite as much as they did because they've got other things going on. They're a little bit less vocal than they were. It's more difficult. I don't know whether you found this, Heather and Howard, but it's more difficult in those that are more quiet in the first place.
Yeah.
Because it sometimes can be quite difficult to read. But certainly they're the sort of things that I've seen which would indicate some element of burnout.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when I start to look through the stats. I had the same sort of thought process as you guys. You can see it in people changing their performance, changing the way they act and behave within the business and things like that. But it was the things that there on that last stat that I gave out that I really started to think about. People who are persistently fatigued. 29% of people are saying they're persistently fatigued. Insomnia, aches and pains, excessive anxiety, and weight gain. And you start to sort of look through some of your businesses, and I start to think about this when I start to think back on some of the businesses that I've run, managed, etc. You can start almost to see people where you're thinking, yeah, that person has gone off with whatever it be, but you can almost sort of see that persistent fatigue, the change in that person's energy levels, etc. And insomnia, how many people say, I'm just having real trouble sleeping and things like that. Just those little telltale signs that people are talking about that. I mean, I'm at a certain age now where everything aches and I've got pains every time I move. So it's I would be completely that person. Has he got stress at work? I'm just old and aching and paining. But when you start to talk about some of the people, it's interesting that you some of the younger people that I've managed, when they're complaining about their aches and pains and things like that, and that they're anxious about certain things. It was those sort of things where I'm sort of thinking back and saying, if you'd have spotted those earlier, because they're giving you telltale signs, because they're sometimes talking about those type of things, would you be more inclined to act on them now? Or have we got that old school, man up, woman up and do the right thing? Should we actually be a little bit more concerned if people are talking about these things, because they may be the things that are the first highlight of people becoming stressed, which then may have an impact on your performance. So why is it important to both mentally and physically refresh your team's mind, body, and soul, especially at this time of year? I think, especially this year, we've probably had one of the biggest years and biggest last 12 months in recruitment ever, but also following on from, the pandemic scenario, etc. Going into 2000, I think a lot of people are really tired and they are looking to refresh. So why is it important that we, as a business, we should be able to look to both mentally and physically refresh our team's mind, body, and soul?
It's really interesting, Howard, because I've seen such a huge change in attitude of business to this. I'm sure you have as well, over the many years that we've been working in recruitment.
Too many minutes.
And it really was a case of don't look, don't see, pretend it doesn't exist. Nobody talked about wellness, or rarely, unless they had personal experience of it. And I think over the years I've seen a really healthy recognition that this stuff is important for performance, and therefore for the performance of your organization. So it's not just a nice to have, it's a have to have.
Yeah.
So there's a business recognition that people's mental and physical well-being impacts on the performance of your business. as well as an ethical responsibility to make sure that you're not providing and creating an environment that, because we'll talk about later in the answer to some of the other questions about what are the things in the workplace that cause this stuff. But there's a real societal move as well towards not hiding this stuff, but openly being willing to talk, and that causes problems for employers as well in terms of the blurred boundaries about what's a work problem and what's not a work problem. But I do think it is that the reason it's important is because there's a real recognition that your performance of your business is impacted by the mental and physical well-being of your teams, and if you have stronger physically and mentally well people working in it, they will perform better. And so there's a real business imperative regardless of all the other societal and ethical and moral things that are going on.
Dave?
I think ethically you have a responsibility as a leader to make sure that your people are performing and engaging and enjoying as much of their job as they can. Not everybody likes the job of recruitment. Some are in it because it's the job that they do, but they wish they weren't in it, as that applies to many, many other jobs. But in order to make sure that people are happy as an employer, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we understand what the motivations of our people are, what their purpose is, why they do what they do, so that when they are maybe off their game, if we use that expression, we can understand why. And I think it's not only about the individual, because if you've got a team of, say, 5 people and one is underperforming due to anxiety or stress or all the things that Howard you spoke about, that will have an effect on everybody else. It has an effect on the whole team dynamic, and then suddenly other things come into focus and people are trying to help that one person because he or she needs help, and then somebody else is missing something, and it kind of becomes a bit infectious. So as leaders, I think our challenge is to find out what's going on. And I thought you put it really well, Heather. Sometimes we do feel, don't we? We tread across that boundary between what is work and what is home. Well, actually, it's all life. I've never been a huge fan of that phrase work-life balance, because for me it's just life, and work is part of life. And if a part of your life is causing you to experience anxiety, causing you to suffer, causing you to put on weight or lose weight or whatever it may be, then as a good employer, we should be able to help you if we can.
It's interesting, isn't it, that I always think about this time of year and we're all sort of banging in for the end of the year, so there's lots of pressure to hit. Doesn't matter where you might have started this might be your Q1, it might be your Q4, it might be your Q3, but we're coming to the end of an actual year and there's that big drive to get forward and drive on. And I always think that people think, well, we're now going to have the Christmas break and the Christmas holidays, etc. But I always think that Christmas break and that Christmas holidays, from my point of view, is always the most stressful holiday in the year. And there's so much going on in there, and there's so much doing. It's not like you're going away for a fortnight and you're relaxing, etc. It just becomes a very stressful sort of situation.
That's really interesting. Sorry, Howard, to cut across. I'm that's so the opposite of my view of that period of time. I remember working for a big organization who went from we shut the office between Christmas and New Year to we're open between Christmas and New Year, and it changed the dynamic. It was the most wonderful period of time because everybody was off. You weren't coming back to a pile of work. It was the only time in the year when you actually relaxed because nobody was in. And it was the least stressful. It was the most recovery. And then that was ruined by them deciding to open the offices between Christmas and New Year. So it's fascinating to hear you think of that as a stressful period. That's
exactly where I was going to get to. That, closing the office is a good thing, but sometimes at home, your family life, all the things that you've got to do through Christmas, etc., becomes very stressful. But you're right. I always think about, we were the same. We opened through New Year and through Christmas and New Year, and how many people complained about it and found that they were forced to come to work, forced to take a holiday, forced to then sit at work and have nothing to do because most clients weren't working, and it was just the most ridiculous thing in the world. And that caused lots of people stress, even though they weren't actually doing anything in work. But it was just a stressful fact that, I suppose FOMO, what they're missing out at home, etc. But I think sometimes lots of people come in and go, did you have a good Christmas? Yeah, it was really Christmas, but the family this, the family that, the family the other, etc., etc., etc. And so I don't think it's a genuine break as, going on a summer holiday or doing, whatever you do and break away. I think it is a very stressful time in itself, is that Christmas period. And I think as then people then sort of drive into the new year, it's that big drive to let's hit the new year running, let's move the new year, let's do this. So there's that sort of, it's a bit like the lull before the storm, but there's so much going on in that lull that I think it creates a massive amount of stress. So how do you get people to physically and mentally refresh themselves? Physically is probably quite easier, but how do you get them to mentally refresh themselves in that period where there's so much going on and there's that urge for the company to get everything done before that final week of December because everyone's off, and then to start the new year with a new bang? I think it just becomes a very stressful place to be. And that's my thoughts on it. It really stressful.
I'm fascinating because I think a summer holiday is more stressful because the world is carrying on during the summer holiday. You're coming back to more work, and so a summer holiday isn't relaxing for me at all. Whereas the Christmas break, because everybody's off, is much. So it's really very personal, isn't it? It's very personal.
It is.
It's interesting in our use of language in recruitment. You use some of the words, we use words like drive, accelerate, urge, push on, demand. And rarely do we hear leaders use words like respite, rehabilitation, rest, recover. Because it's not part of our day-to-day language, because most of us in recruitment are on all the time. But actually the rest and the respite and the recovery and the rehabilitation is really important. It really is important to be able to take yourself out of the situation you're in and try to find that space, and without that stress of what am I missing out on and what's it going to be like when I get back. And I think as leaders we all struggle and have to juggle with that, but particularly for our people. But if we don't do it, I can guarantee you now our people won't. Because if we're on 100% of the time, our people will think that they're supposed to be like that as well, and then that causes anxiety.
I think there's something really interesting in what you're saying, Dave, in terms of how we set up that Christmas break. That what we do is we don't talk about getting going again in January until January. But actually we have genuine downtime, and that's the language we use. I think there's something in that.
I was just about to say the same thing. How we set December up, it's that big drive, and we're going to talk about it next year. The year's not ended. There's so much to do towards the end of the year, and that's that big drive. And there's that big sort of, I always remember December thinking like this. Everyone's booking holidays because they couldn't carry the holidays over, so lots of staff are booking holidays because they've got to take them over. Clients don't really pick up the phone because they're all out on Christmas dues and having Christmas dues, etc., etc. You're trying to put candidates through the process, and they're thinking more about Christmas. Would they rather accept the job in the new year, etc.? So all these sort of things bank up. You then start thinking, I'm thinking it from my point of view. I'm thinking, it's 23rd of December. I've got one shopping day till Christmas. I should start my shopping. Thank you, Amazon Prime. You've been a godsend to me. But all of those sort of little things that you've got to start to think, and it's even harder now sometimes when if lots of people are working from home, where you'd be working in town, so you could nip out and buy the odd thing. You've now got it. I think it sort of just becomes a really sort of strange time where stress is. I think what you're saying there, Dave, how we set it up and how we, verbalize it, how we communicate to our teams about what it is really important, because are we compounding it or are we making it better, irrespective of personal feelings? So that sort of leads to that question is, what do you think then the biggest cause of burnout is in our teams?
Well, I think I can answer this question with a bit of evidence. Some of you will know that I'm on the board of a hospital, and I was there last week, and we had a major learning experience where we were told what is the biggest cause of burnout in the Western world, and it's sleep. It's sleep deprivation and patterns of sleep and changes in sleep. And the NHS in the UK and many other Western societies, healthcare systems, regard sleep as the biggest challenge to healthcare for the next 10 years. And when I talk about sleep, I mean those that are just not getting proper sleep, enough sleep, relaxed sleep, because that leads to tiredness, which leads to anxiety, which leads to stress, which leads to illness, which leads to more effects on the NHS. So the person who was talking, an eminent professor who was talking, was saying the reasons why, if you don't get enough sleep, this happens. This is what we need to be aware of. And you know, we've got a school of nursing at our hospital. It graduates 150 nurses a year, and they were learning about what it means to be dealing with people who just aren't getting enough sleep. So sleep, or lack of it, is one of the major causes of burnout.
That's a really interesting comment, Dave, because I wear a watch that tells me how much I sleep, what I sleep, etc. And I know when I'm really tired, and I know that I'm fatigued. And it's interesting, persistent fatigue, insomnia, aches and pains. But if I know I've had 2 or 3 nights where I've had really good sleep, and it's not just about the duration that you're in bed, it's the actual sleep patterns that you've got and how much it's interrupted, etc. And it measures all of that for me. And it's really interesting that I know that certain things are happening. And I look at simple things. I know if I have, let's say on Friday night, we're Helen and I are going to see a band, so I know I'll have a drink. My average heart rate when I sleep drops to its lowest of around about 38. I've got a really slow heart rate, by the way. I'm not dying. It's about 38. But I know if I have a drink, my average heart rate when I'm sleeping is about 48 to 50. So I know that my body is massively working to get rid of the alcohol out of my body, which means I'm not having a great night's sleep, which means I'm really, really fatigued. So you start to think about how young people, sort of their lives, etc. And I don't drink very often or on a regular basis. I'm your archetype old man binge drinker. Go out when I only drink when I go out and things like that. I don't drink at home. And so it's really interesting that things like that. And so finding out what makes my sleep, me have a poor sleep, is really important. And I know if I've had a stressful day at work, I will have a poor sleep at night. And so it's how do you de-stress and how do you do these things? So that as a burnout cause is really interesting. I was thinking, burnout, it's, are we targeting people too much? Are we doing this? Are we there? But do those things then lead to that? Because you're worrying about your target, therefore, will you have a really good night's sleep? So I take that massively on board, Dave, because I see that, and sort of into my 50s, since I've started measuring my sleep and understanding when I've had a bad night and a good night, and then saying, right, I need to go to bed earlier because I need to get a good night's sleep. I find I'm far more refreshed, where before I wasn't really bothered. I wasn't monitoring. It really has changed my mental and physical well-being.
Yeah, it's true.
Honestly, I think you're right. Sleep's a biggie, and I think it's one of the biggest gifts that you can give your kids. For those of you who are parents, is teaching them how to sleep well and teaching them good sleep habits, and then we as adults learn them. And there's some fabulous science. I don't know if any of you have ever read there's a book by a guy called Dr. Richard Ferber. Talks about Ferberizing your children. It's a fabulous book for adult. He solves adult sleep problems as well. So it's a bit controversial, but we can have that conversation offline. But that gift of being able to sleep is massive for mental health. But in terms of organisations, I just would take a slightly different perspective on it for the audience. I think one of the biggest causes of burnout is poor management and poor leadership in organisations. I think we talked about this on previous webinars. I think managers have a huge part to play in the effectiveness and the growth and scaling of organizations, and part of that is because of their impact on the mental health of the people in their teams. And there's a piece of work done a few years back with the CIPD and the health and safety executive, who correlated good management behavior and stress levels in organizations, and they created some really great tools to use for helping with that. And it really is about putting management good practice, has a huge impact on overall well-being.
Let's sort of push a bit further into that, because the next question I was going to ask was, management, as we've said over the last couple of weeks, are the most influential positions in the business, especially the lower end, your team lead, etc., because they're right at the coalface and influence everything. So what we're talking about, managers can lead to other people within the business having burnout. So how do we prevent the managers from getting burnout or being burnt out?
Well, by managing them well, right? So as leaders, we have to lead our managers well, and we have to give them the tools to do the job. You know, how many people in organizations are given the role of being a manager? And we know billing managers, toughest job in the world, managing your own desk performance and being responsible for other people. And how often in organizations does that happen without managers being given the tools to do the job properly? So, I think one of the biggest ways in which we can influence that well is to give managers the tools to do the job effectively, and to give them the support by being their leader and managing them well with tools.
So could some of that be changed by changing the word manager? Because I've talked about this quite a bit, that I think the word manager sometimes is misused, where really that team leader is an at-desk coach. You only get to a certain point when you actually start to truly manage the business or manage, what's going on and what you can influence. And I think maybe it's how we train people and what we develop people to be doing at that stage. And I think when you're coaching and developing people, it's a very different style than when you're actually managing them and you have that. So maybe are we putting too much burden on people too early from a management point of view without the right tools and the right influence? And, Heather, and you and I know, because we do an awful lot of management training into clients on, big management training courses, that it's interesting, just simple things that you're saying to some of the people on those courses, and they're going, oh, OMG, I didn't know that's what was happening. I didn't know this.
Wonderful light bulb moment.
Yeah. And you see them almost every time that light bulb switches on, and they go, so what you're saying is that, what I say to people has an impact, what I don't say has an impact, how I look at them has an impact, etc., etc., etc. And all these little light bulb moments come onto people. But it's interesting that the pressure that they get. And I remember, it would be interesting if Paul was here, talking about, the targets that we give managers. And you're right there that those team leaders have got their own target, then they've got everyone else's target, etc. And it's how they're, how are we causing stress by these type of things? So we talked about one of the facts was that training and well-being, or training and development of people, was a massive stress reductor. So should we be investing more into training not just our managers but training our people to be able to deliver more, because that is a huge factor in reducing stress if we give them the better tools to deliver?
Yeah, and I think I remember when I was promoted to a manager or a leader, and I got asked a question that I didn't know how to answer because I'd never been asked it before. And my boss said to me, how do you like to be managed? Which I thought was a really great question, and I hadn't expected it. And I'd just been promoted into this new position and I couldn't really answer it in any sort of articulate way. And I was thinking, I bet he thinks I'm a right numpty because I can't even answer that question. But it was one of those questions that actually required a bit of thought about me, about how I like to, how they can get the best out of my performance. And I've always used that question many, many years and many, many times later. And sometimes people will say, oh, I don't like micromanagement, and I don't like this, and I don't like that. And it can be a little bit of a quick response. But what it forces you to do is to think about, well, how do I get the best out of you? Because if I'm your manager, what do I need to do? How do I need to behave to get the best out of you? And what modeling can I do so that you can get the best out of your people? Because if you can do that, that reduces stress, that reduces anxiety, that reduces burnout, because you're all working in different styles with different people. One thing we all know from our experience is that there isn't one way of managing and leading people for every single person. I know some people think there is, but I've never experienced it in my career.
So day 2 of the course, Dave. It's not about knowing all the answers. It's listening to know what better questions to ask. And that's a great question. How would you like to be managed? So it's listening to what the old people are saying to you so you can ask better questions rather than you worrying about knowing all the answers. But then it's about active listening, isn't it, to your people, and listening to learn so you can ask better questions rather than listening for the gap where you interject with an answer or a question that then just moves the conversation on and away from where that is to where you want it to be or where you think you should be going. So it's an interesting one. But as we're talking about managers and we're talking about leaders, as leaders of the business, if everyone else in the business is fit and ready to go, but you as the leader isn't, that has a massive effect on the business. So what should leaders be actually doing, and owners of the business should actually be doing, to make sure that they're fit and healthy to actually lead?
There's a really good quote. I was just trying to look up, so I can't remember the guy's name. I think his name's Peter Robinson, but he has a great 2-stage piece around leaders, so the first statement is, it's not about you, right? And it's all about the people in your organization, right? And then so you can do a whole piece around that. But the second part is, it's all about you. Now, we are really kidding ourselves as leaders if we don't think that how we are doesn't impact the people around us. And looking at our own mental health and our own burnout levels and our own stress is just so important. And if you think you can hide it from your organization, I'm telling you, you can't, right? So looking after yourself and getting some support, whether that is, obviously, I would say this, wouldn't I? Having a mentor, having somebody that you can talk to independently, having a counselor, going to yoga, doing Pilates, taking up running, whatever it is. Entrepreneurs, business leaders are passionate about their businesses. That's why they do what they do. And some of them sometimes forget to take care of themselves. And I really would, don't forget that second half of it. It's all about you. If you don't look after yourself, ain't no one else going to do it for you.
You have to. Heather. And it's interesting. The Sunday Times always has a business interview on page 5 with a famous or maybe not so famous business leader, and it talks about what they do in their day. I mean, it's a column that's been going for 15 years, and I can't tell you the exact number because I've not measured it, but most of them say, I start my day with, and remember, these are people who've got a fair bit of money, so it's slightly different than the average business leader. But most of them will say, I start my day with my personal trainer, or I start my day doing some yoga, or I'll have a call with my mentor, but it's always, I start with a period of reflection with somebody else. Whether that's mental resilience, physical resilience, it's them just being able to talk to somebody. And now some of them, if you're running Mercedes-Benz, you employ somebody to do that for you. But it's just the importance of having someone to be able to do that. So if you can't afford that for yourself, but at least if you could do it for yourself, then that's also a good example of leadership for your people. Because
there are loads of ways that you can do that without spending money, Dave. There are loads of ways, aren't there? There are podcasts that you can listen to. There are YouTube videos that will take you through yoga. There are a million interventions. The bit you've got the most control over is the time and focus. So taking that time and focus to give yourself something is really important.
And I think it's that taking that time to realize that you have to take that time, otherwise you do burn out. You just can't keep going and going and going. And it was interesting sort of going through lockdown, the difference between, I'll use myself and my brother, he said, it's lockdown, blah, blah, blah. And, this is when we were sort of creating the business, David. We were working every single day on doing everything that we could be doing, et cetera, and he's on furlough. And it was the huge difference between, and he kept going, but you're running the business, you own the business, take some time, and I haven't got time to take mine. He said, but everyone else is on furlough, what are you doing? And it was just this whole different concept of people. And I think it's that people think because you run a business that you've got a very different lifestyle or a different meaning, and yet people don't see the hours and hours and hours and hours and hours that you're putting in.
Yeah.
And I quite often say to people jokingly, what are you doing tomorrow? Well, I'll be getting 3 hours before I go to bed because I need to go and do this, and to do that I need to do this. So I'll be getting up 3 hours before I go to bed. And it was just sort of like that stupid sort of Monty Python joke, I get up 3 hours before I go to bed to do certain things. But that's what most business leaders are like. And we're talking about Dave's comment there that the biggest cause of burnout is lack of sleep, persistent fatigue, insomnia. That's most business leaders that I come across, So it sort of says that there's a high level of, on the edge of burnout with a lot of business leaders, and it's finding that thing that distresses it. Yeah, and I as you guys know, I train a reasonable amount, and people say, why do you still train at your age? And it's not about fitness for me. It's about giving me that opportunity just to go blank, just to stop all of those thoughts running around my head and go blank and switch off and completely, refresh my mental state, not so much my physical state, but refresh my mental state. So I think it's really important that we sort of look at that from leaders, and who recognizes it for you, who tells you that. And I think that's the bit that sometimes being told that you look tired, you look stressed, you look fatigued, etc., is a bit of an insult to a human being. But I think from a manager, you need to take that sometimes and think, if that's the case, how am I then reflecting that back onto my staff, but not only onto my staff, but onto my home life and onto the people at home that I love, and etc. So it does come in two different ways. So when we talk about that, we talk about stress, strain, fatigue, etc. How we know that leads to absenteeism and high attrition, poor morale, poor relationships. So what would you introduce to prevent these things from happening?
I think one of the things that I found in personally speaking, and also from business, is having another significant interest that has nothing to do with the business. And I don't mean family. I don't mean that. I mean, getting involved in something in your local community. It could be coaching your football team. It could be doing an art class. It could be learning a new language. It could be being part of a church or part of a community. But having something other than what is driving you and what is driving your performance and where you are a leader, where you are involved in a community that, it's relaxing and it's different. And I think I've certainly found it in my career that those people who have interests outside of recruitment, because it is so full on, isn't it, or can be so full on, tend to be better leaders. I've had managers who are scout leaders, who are doing the 3 peaks, who are training for a physical contest, or cycling, or they run their youth group at church or whatever. Those sort of people in my experience, tend to be those that don't show as much evidence of burnout, because they realize it isn't all consuming. Whereas those of us that lead businesses where recruitment is all consuming all the time are the ones that tend to experience burnout more, and anxiety and stress. And then that infectiously goes through the whole company. And before you know it, everybody's on edge.
Interesting. Yeah. I wonder if it's just about having a perspective that's different, or different focus, or I think that's a really interesting correlation. I think it's true. I think it's a really good one. And just to have a slightly different perspective and to say something slightly controversial here, what I wouldn't do is introduce unlimited holiday. So I've seen lots of organizations introduce unlimited holiday because they think that's the solution. And it can be, but only if you've got your culture right. So you've really got to look at the culture of the organization, because if it's wrong, introducing unlimited holiday and stopping there being rules around it, all that does is people take less time off.
Well, I was going to say, I introduced that into a company and ran it in a company, and it wasn't about to stop fatigue, etc. I just thought it'd be a nice thing to do, and that is exactly what it drew. People took less holidays. And it wasn't people took less holidays, people took significantly less holidays.
Yeah.
And it was something like they took something less than 60% of their actually original holiday allowance, because they felt they didn't have to do it. There wasn't that need to take those holidays, that rush, that urge to take those holidays. So it's an interesting.
It's often introduced with the best of intentions, but if you don't position it well and you don't get the cultural message right, then it will have exactly that impact, Howard. And people end up taking less holiday, which is not good at all in terms of productivity.
So I think, to me, when we start to talk about this one, it's about what do we introduce? And I think what we can introduce that really helps this is a higher level of understanding of what your communication will do. So when you're communicating, whether you're communicating targets, when you're communicating new rollouts of things, or you're stopping certain things, etc., thinking what the implications may be for not just one or two people in your business, but for the majority of your business. What is it like to do? Is it going to cause stress? Is it going to cause a bit of sleeplessness, etc.? What is it doing? And I think sometimes we can change the way that we communicate with people and be a little bit more understanding of what that communication actually does from the ripple effect. Then I think, to me, that's the thing I'd introduce. I'd introduce a better way of communicating, or a better understanding of what your communication is actually going to cause at the end of it, rather than that knee-jerk reaction communication that sometimes has massive ramifications at the end of it. And then you spend more time dealing with the ramifications when the communication could have been better, and that would have never happened. And that may make your business a little bit more steady, should I say, with regards to volatility when communications come out that really upset the business. Lots of leaders, let's finish on this, lots of leaders will be of the mindset that people, and I said it earlier, should simply toughen up. Does this have to change? Should it change?
It's a really interesting debate, isn't it? Because I've had conversations with some great leaders who have got that mindset, and they're great leaders, but they talk about the snowflake generation. They talk about, there's just no resilience in young people and all that kind of stuff. And so, they want people to toughen up, and they're great leaders, right? So it's a very difficult argument to have, but I think if we have still got that attitude, we have got to change it. We do. We can go too far the other way, Howard, but the reality is the last few years have caused some quite significant increases in mental health concerns. There's a much better understanding of how important it is that we talk about this kind of stuff and we hide it. And since when has telling somebody to toughen up ever had any impact? It's like telling somebody who's angry to calm down, isn't it? It's red rag to a bull. It's just it's such a superficial and irritating response, frankly. You've got to get to the root of what's going on. This stuff impacts on the performance of your business and your people, and it's not good enough to just say toughen up.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also in context, if you were feeling strong enough and one of your leaders or managers said toughen up, I think if you can respond, what do they mean by toughen up? Do they mean toughen up so that you can sell more, you can make more phone calls, you can get more CVs out, you can be a better leader, you can be a better manager? Or do they mean tough enough so that you can improve your mental resilience, you can improve your physical fitness, you can improve the way that you engage with your people? If it's the latter, and we know that normally it's the former, but if it's the latter, then that's not a bad bit of advice. But I think if somebody is shouting or screaming or just telling you to toughen up, that isn't really the way of modern engagement and modern management. And leadership is about communication and engagement. And why would I want to engage with somebody who's lording it over me and telling me to toughen up?
I don't want to lead an organization that damages the mental health of the people who work there.
No.
It was really interesting that I was probably 1 foot in, 1 foot out the toughen up camp. Sometimes I thought you should toughen up, and sometimes it's understanding it. And I remember going to this sounds a bit sort of strange, but it's what we were talking about. We were talking about, from my background in martial arts, we were doing something with regards to, when people get attacked and what happens, etc. And someone said, "Oh, people just need to toughen up if it happens." And this guy turned around and said, "It's not about toughening up. It's having the reason why you should get up. What's the reason? Is it your family? Is it this? Is it that? Is it the other?" So every time someone says that to me, toughen up, that's the thing I said. And what's the reason why I should be toughening up? Why should I get up? Why should I do that? Why should I have to toughen up? What's the personal reason to me, and what's the business reason that you're asking me to do this? Because that's the bit. And I think with people talking about toughening up, I think it's more of an ignorance to a certain degree, but I think it's actual a view of saying, actually, you need to be telling them more. You need to be telling them why and how, and that may help them rather than just giving them the end product, which is toughen up. And it's that sort of comment that it's, tough times don't last, but tough people do. But it's what strategy have you got behind that reason why you're lasting? It's all the things that you need to do behind that. So I think that one statement that people come out and throw away all the time is wrong. But if you put the substance behind it and gave them the why, then it becomes actually quite a powerful comment.
Yeah. Well, there's a phrase, wasn't there? You used to hear that phrase, "Oh, he's tough as old boots." Well, in 2022, who wants to wear old boots?
I was going to say, if you've seen most of my old boots, they're not very tough. They're all knackered.
We want to wear a nice pair of trainers. We want to wear something that's comfortable, that's springy, that gives us energy, that gives us enjoyment. That's what we want to wear. We don't want to go around wearing old boots and be all tough. I'm not a big fan of that phrase.
So let's finish it there. Next week, it's again, so we're going to push this topic a little bit further. Next week, we're going to talk about this year's not finished yet. So how do we close the calendar out? What do we need to focus on? What should we stop our consultants? How do we stop our consultants taking their foot off the gas sometimes, which is what happens? And how do you finish the year on a front foot in a positive way where people are absolutely energized to go again next year? So, ladies and gents, thank you very much. Heather and Dave, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a super weekend, and we'll see you all next week.
Have a good week, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.